I'm Orkhan Mir-Kasimov, Associate Professor at the Institute of Ismaili Studies. When I started working on the matullāhī manuscripts coming from the private Ismaili collections in Badakhshan, one of my central questions was to understand why these works, mostly attributed to the prominent Sufi master of the 15th century, Shah Ni'matullahi Wali, were preserved and apparently copied and circulated until the present time within the Ismaili community. Of course, we know that the Ismailis and matullāhīs entertained close and friendly relationships, especially between the 18th and 20th centuries. However, my feeling was that the contents and circulation of the manuscripts indicate some deeper reason which can be reduced to historical and political circumstances alone. Equally unconvincing is the idea that the matullāhī manuscripts are used for the purpose of the tactical dissimulation, the taqiyya. This is because the modern Ismailis are not hiding their identity, and even if they were concerned by the taqiyya, it is difficult to see how the random recitation of the Sufi poetry could serve such an objective. The way the matullāhī manuscripts are incorporated into the Ismaili cultural heritage and ritual suggests that these works were considered as a part of this heritage. In other words, Shah Ni'matullahi Wali, like other prominent Persian-speaking mystical poets and thinkers such as Sana'i, Ghaznavi, Farid ad-Din Attar, and Jalaluddin Rumi, were harmoniously blended into the cultural and intellectual identity of the Ismaili community of Badakhshan. And this can be considered as a particular case of a much broader interaction and rapprochement between Shiism and Sufism, which was present throughout the Islamic history, but significantly accelerated in the period following the Mongol invasions of the 13th century. At this point, I would like to highlight that we sometimes tend to think about various Islamic groups and movements in clear-cut categories. So here we have Sunnis and here we have Shiis. On one side, we have Sufis, and on the other, we have jurists, the ulama. We have rationalist theology, kalam, on the left, and we have traditionalists on the right. From this perspective, for example, the Shiis in general and Ismailis in particular are a group which is distinctly different from the Sufis. However, in reality, we often have situations when the borders delineating these identities are more porous. For example, there is something that some scholars call Sunni Shiism, when Sunni authors praise Ali ibn Abi Talib and Shii Imams. There exist Shii-Sufi orders. And perhaps the Ismaili appropriation of matullāhī texts can be considered from the point of view of this phenomenon of combined or fluid identities. In other words, this means that we should try to understand the real identity of various groups, not trying to insert them into one of the existing categories. Now, to return to the interactions between the Sufis and Shiis. Sufis and Shiis are two esoteric currents of Islam, and as such, they share many common features. Major branches of the Shi'is, such as the Twelvers and the Ismailis, adhere, like the Sufis, to the idea of divinely inspired guide. However, for the Sufis, the spiritual leadership is not limited to the prophetic family and belongs to the sheikhs, spiritual masters who attained the highest degree of enlightenment. Both Sufis and Shi'is venerate Ali ibn Abi Talib and the prophetic family and recognize the divine election, walaya, as source of spiritual knowledge. The impregnation of the Shi'ism by Sufi ideas and symbolism was to some extent a compensation for the weakening of the esoteric aspect of the Twelver Shi'ism after the occultation of the 12th Imam, and for the difficulty of the direct expression of the Ismaili doctrinal views after the destruction of Alamut. Another strong argument for the incorporation of the Sufi literature into the Nizari Ismaili tradition is that the Nizari written heritage was severely diminished after the destruction of the libraries in Ismaili strongholds in northern Iran. Recognition of the Sufi literature as expressing the same esoteric truths as the teachings of the Imams could have been seen as a remedy to the loss of the Ismaili libraries in the fire of Mongol invasions. So such is the background against which not only the historical but also deeper spiritual and intellectual bonds between the Ismailis and Sufis should be considered. The compilations of poetry attributed to Shah Ni'matullah Wali in the holdings of the Ismaili Special Collections include mostly manuscripts dating from the 19th and 20th centuries. Significant amount of manuscripts is written on modern supports, and this shows that this poetry is still popular and circulates widely among the Ismailis of Badakhshan. A few notes about the contents of these fragments of poetry. The selection of the poems attributed to Shah Ni'matullah Wali clearly resounds with Ismaili worldview. For example, Shah Ni'matullah Wali calls himself the light of Ali, Nur-e Ali. He is the son of the real, Haq, and the real itself. He is the teacher of the prophetic law, and he is the guide in the paths of sainthood, walaya. He is the mirror reflecting the walaya of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And several manuscripts contain verses praising Ali and his family, describing Ali as the supreme Imam, and so on. In addition to the poetry, one manuscript dating from 19th century contains also a substantial collection of Shah Ni'matullah Wali's doctrinal works. More details on this can be found in my article in the volume Texts, Scribes and Transmission, edited by Dr. Wafi Momin. As mentioned, a significant part of the poetry attributed to Shah Ni'matullah Wali is found in manuscripts which were copied recently, that is dating from the 20th century. And this would suggest an active circulation of these texts in modern Ismaili community of Badakhshan. It can be supposed that these manuscripts were used as memory aids in rituals and practices such as Chirag-e-Rovshan and Madahani. Shah Ni'matullah Wali is still referred to by some Ismailis in Badakhshan as Pir-e-Marifat, master of knowledge or ultimate teacher. However, it seems that the younger generation is less familiar with the Arabic script and might have their copies now transcribed in Cyrillic. And the knowledge of any doctrinal aspects incorporated into Shah Ni'matullah's poetry has apparently decreased. To conclude, I just would like to say that while the study of the Ismaili manuscripts obviously is our main source of knowledge of the Ismaili tradition itself, The study of the non-Ismaili manuscripts preserved in Ismaili collections gives us an insight into the relationships between the Ismailis and other Islamic groups. It appears that in spite of its obvious relevance to the area of Ismaili and broader Shi'i and Islamic studies, this topic has not been systematically explored yet. So a more substantial exploration of the non-Ismaili manuscripts circulating in Ismaili milieux would therefore be highly desirable.